Recording in progress.
All right, good afternoon. It is now 4 o'clock. I'd like to call the Strategic Planning Ad Hoc Committee for February 27th, 2024. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
Livingston. Here. Mackey.
Here.
Newton.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And just so the record can reflect, Councilwoman Newton did reach out to me ahead of time to notify me that she would be attending this committee meeting virtually per our rules. Also want to take a moment to welcome Councilwoman Barron and Councilwoman English. They're joining afternoon as well. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from February 13th, 2024.
So move, Madam Chair.
The motion,
Second.
second. Any discussion? Okay, Madam Clerk?
Livingston.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next is the adoption of the agenda. Do we have any changes or additions from staff?
No, Madam Chair.
Option.
Adoption of a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Is there a second? I'll second. Madam Clerk?
Livingston.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right, the item for discussion/action today is the strategic planning update focused on the public-private partnership. And just as a reminder for committee members and also council members present, in our last strategic planning meeting that we had at the end of the year, we started our discussion around the public-private partnership. And this is tied to Goal 2 in our strategic plan about increased economic development and creating a public-private partnership, or P3, as you might hear us refer to it. And so we began that discussion at the end of last year, looking at how do we begin to develop kind of these spheres of what a board might look like and how we might want to go about discussing and moving this forward to create a P3 that is really, Richland County specific, that's made for us. And we also met as a body in late January in Spartanburg, and part of our strategic planning forum, we also had additional discussions related to economic development, public-private partnerships. Representatives from One Spartanburg came in and spoke with members of council and, really provided insight into their model, which is different than many others across our state. And through that, there was a lot of conversation that council members expressed interest in certain aspects of that P3 and wanted to really continue the conversation. And so we have Ray Jones here with us today, who has been helping us to kind of go down this road with the public-private partnership, but wanted to have some more conversations today to kind of keep momentum going and shape what it is that we want this public-private partnership to look like in Richland County. And so, Mr. Jones, you want me to turn it over to you, either one?
Turn it on. Everybody hear me okay? Figured I'd come over here with Miss English. I'm normally on the other side. So I'm Ray Jones with Parker Poe. And Madam Chair and other members of the committee and other guests that are present, wanted to kind of step back a little bit today as we talk about the P3. And if you will, for just a minute, if you'll allow me to use a restaurant analogy. You know, restaurants, they have a really pretty front of the house, and they normally hand you a really nice menu, and you kind of get to work your way down the menu and take a look at what you want from the restaurant. Rare is it the case that we would go into the back of the restaurant and look at all the ingredients on the shelf and look at how they've organized the kitchen and look at how they've organized the line and look at all of the detail that might be behind what it is you actually want to order off the menu. As a lawyer, I'm guilty, I think, of having spent a lot of time, along with Attorney Wright, thinking about the details of the P3. We have been in the kitchen, looking at the spices, comparing notes over our cumin powder, thinking a lot about what's going to go in the dish. But I think after the conversation that council had in Spartanburg, we ought to talk more about the menu. We ought to talk about what it is Richland County wants from its P3. And in order to do that, I thought it might be interesting for you all to hear about what's on the menu in other parts of the state. And also not only hear about what's on the menu in other parts of the state, but also to hear some feedback from our own Economic Development Office about ideas they have for what might be on our P3 menu. So Madam Chair, if that suits you, I'd like to just talk about what some other folks are doing to maybe start some conversation, and then we'll sort of go from there.
Thank you.
So just like when you go to a restaurant, you know, let's say we're at an Italian restaurant, you know, you're going to find staples. You'll find spaghetti and lasagna and other, you know, dishes that would always be on an Italian menu. And I think largely when you look around the state at P3s, you find certain staples that are on their menu. For instance, almost all of them talk about workforce development. They talk about that in a very broad way. There's different approaches to it, but nevertheless, workforce development seems to be on the menu for almost every P3 in the state. Product development, meaning sites and buildings, is also a staple item on almost everybody's menu. And when I say everybody, we looked at Florence Progress, we looked at The Link, which is the P3 that serves Sumter and Lee counties. We also looked at Advance Dorchester. We looked at the Greenville Area Development Corporation. We looked at the Development Corporation of Anderson County, York County's Economic Development Corporation, Georgetown County's Economic Development Corporation, the Aiken-Edgefield Partnership. We looked at one Spartanburg as well. And then finally, we looked at the Myrtle Beach Regional Economic Development Corporation. That also gives you a sense of how many P3s there are around the state. So what else might you find common on a P3 menu besides workforce development and product development? A big one is marketing. Marketing activities, both domestic and international, are a huge focus for P3s around the state. Another one that we often find on the menu is, of course, prospect recruitment, the idea of recruiting new businesses and industry to our location is another staple on the P3 menu. And finally, oftentimes there is some degree of advertising or highlighting the lifestyle elements of a particular community that the P3 is either partnering with other agencies that are undertaking those kinds of activities or doing so on its own. So to review, the staple items on a P3 menu: workforce development, product development, marketing, prospect development, advertising, and talking about the lifestyle elements of a particular community. But just like any other good menu that you might stumble upon, there's also some specialties of the house. There's some things that are done that we think are very community specific, and we wanted to share some of those with you. In Florence, for instance, the Florence P3 hosts a Florence County Legislative Day, where they invite the businesses in Florence County to come to the State House to meet the legislative delegation and connect the industries that have invested in Florence with the decision makers at the state level. So that is part of what their P3 does to make that connection. So that's a specialty on the Florence menu. In the link, which is Sumter and Lee County, y'all may have heard the term site certification, which is an idea that you're presenting to the world that you've already done certain basic due diligence on a site so that when a company shows up, they know that certain things have already been done. Well, they have their own branded site certification. So that, and when you think about product development, they've taken it a step further. They're certifying sites in a particular way. But there's also, I think, things that are even more granular and interesting. For instance, the Development Corporation of Anderson County, it takes workforce development to the next level. It's got a program where they take student apprenticeship programs from the high school level and help connect them to businesses and industry in Anderson County. So it's not just workforce development sort of at the college level, it's workforce development at the high school level. So that is a specialty of the house, if you will, in Anderson County. In Georgetown, they do something called their biannual CEO Roundtable. They bring the business leaders of the community, they facilitate that meeting, and they have those folks come and meet with local elected officials so that there can be an exchange of information. It is done biannually to ensure that there's a dialogue. Interestingly enough, and another way to solicit feedback, that feedback loop is a specialty of the House also in York County. York County does a biannual survey of all the businesses in York County where they ask them questions about what it's like to do business in York County. They're asking for direct feedback from them so that they can then channel that into their local business liaison function and address issues that local businesses are sharing with the elected officials. One other item, or items that you probably heard about in Spartanburg, they're known for bringing folks together in lots of different settings. They have professional pours where they bring certain kinds of industries together to talk. They have caffeinated conversations where they're bringing other kinds of folks together to talk. Their role is a connector organization. So on their menu, a specialty on their menu is being a connector for businesses within that community. One of the other interesting things we saw, and obviously some of these menu items are things we think could be of interest here in Richland, and is in Myrtle Beach, they have an element of their P3 that is focused on the development of affordable housing. Of course, the businesses in Myrtle Beach are largely hospitality and tourism related, and there's a huge issue with having affordable housing for folks that work in those industries. The other thing I wanted to mention to the group, Madam Chair, and then I want to talk a little bit about some ideas that have come from our folks locally. But one of the things we saw in one of the other communities was a very deliberate effort to connect local businesses with businesses that are investing in a particular county. So understanding what, if somebody needs a particular type of service or product, whether or not that is available locally, and connecting the local vendors with the industry that's coming in. So a local business connection kind of item is on the menu. Looking at some ideas that have come just in conversations with our own staff here, because we asked them, what are some things that could be on the menu here in Richland? Ideas that were put forth. One is a coordination of economic development efforts, specifically city, county, and regional local economic development efforts. You all are certainly aware that when you go to a groundbreaking, as they say, victory has many fathers and mothers. A lot of people show up. Sometimes they're coordinated in what they've been doing, and sometimes they're not. And so there's certainly the thought that on the menu for the P3 here, it could be an element of coordination. Next, we happen to have a really special opportunity with Scout Motors here. Y'all know that. Y'all have been living it for the last 18 months. But in particular, the special opportunity is to make sure that, one, there's workforce here to serve Scout in particular and all of Scout suppliers, which means that when we talk about product development in Richland County, we need to make sure that we have sufficient areas for businesses big and small that would serve that Scout ecosystem. So not unlike what's happened in the upstate, if you talk to the Spartanburg folks or the Greenville folks, they have been working on a BMW specific strategy for years, right? Making sure that if BMW has somebody that makes even the smallest part in Germany, that they're willing to come here, and it's made easy for them to come here and make the part. It would be a similar strategy, a similar specialty, if you will, on our menu to focus on Scout. There's some ideas here about things that are workforce specific, but not necessarily maybe in the way you might think. In other parts of the country, there are special programs that lay over top of typical public transportation programs that are designed to make it easier for people to commute to work. Whether they be rideshare programs, whether they be community-led rideshare programs, the idea is that those programs might get deeper into the community and have more varied routes than typical public transportation. And of course, getting to work is something that's extremely important for everyone who is looking for a good job. Some of this is being piloted right now in Spartanburg, so perhaps on our menu could be a focus on the modes of transportation and getting folks to work. A second thing that you all know is a huge issue is childcare. One of the things that has been suggested for the menu for our P3 is to look very closely at what the childcare options are in our community and to see if we can do a service to the workforce in our community with connecting them with opportunities and even maybe even going so far as to ensure the development of additional childcare opportunities. As you all know, when this council took the step to help support the development or at least the provision of childcare at Scout, it's one of the first times a county had ever stepped in and leaned into that issue in the whole state. And it appears to be something that maybe could be also on the menu for our P3. Finally, there are a number of sectors, workforce sectors, that we have talked about that are, I'll call broadly, the knowledge-based economy. The types of businesses for which certain types of educational training would make it a lot easier to recruit. The pipeline of students to take those kinds of jobs has to start early. One of the items that could be on our P3's menu is to work earlier and sooner with high schools, with technical schools, to ensure that the skill level building is happening not just when they graduate from high school, but happening much earlier. And to do so not in a vacuum, but to provide practical opportunities for students in our community, in our schools, to then start to interact with the likes of Scout and the other large industries and employers we have to begin to be prepared to have a good job. The final thing, or the final couple of ideas I'll just share with you that have come out of conversations with our own group is making a place for the exchange of ideas and also the promotion of ambassadorship. So the idea of hosting receptions for investors in our P3 that highlight success and help them become better ambassadors for the community, where there is feedback, a feedback loop flowing between council, between the local governments, and between the private investment community to effectively help make those folks ambassadors for other types of recruitment. And finally, to also target young professional groups. I was born and raised here. I decided to stay here. There are a lot of folks who are in high school and college here that think like we do about our community and want to know if they have a job when they graduate. And so the promotion of those opportunities, both in terms of ensuring they know what they are, but also ensuring that the employers understand the kind and caliber of students that we have locally, is something else that could be on our P3 menu. So there's a lot of exciting things happening around the state. I invite you all to think about this as a menu. And the reason I think that's important is if we decide as a county on what we want on our P3 menu, then we can back into the details. So in other words, if you all suggest to us, we want certain types of programs on our menu, well, then that's something that we can sit down with Attorney Wright, with Economic Development Office, and start working on the ingredients that would be necessary to achieve that menu item. And so I think it was a wonderful turn of phrase when you and I talked about what you all heard about in Spartanburg, and it really revealed to me maybe we need to focus more on what's on the menu in Richland County.
Thank you so much, Ray. I want to open it up to committee members and other council members for questions and dialogue. I want to welcome Councilwoman Terratio and Councilman Brannon. Thank you for joining us. I do know Ms. Newton has a question and she's online, so I'll let her go first. Can you hear us, Ms. Newton? Ms. Newton? All right, we'll come back to her. Mr. Livingston, you recognize.
Mr. Jones, that was a lot of interesting stuff that we can work with. Now I'm trying to figure out, how to even get started now with all of this.
It's a big menu.
But I do agree that it may make sense now that with where we are now to kind of back up and talk about what we really want before we form a group. So that makes a whole lot of sense to me. So I think my next concern or step would be to figure out a way to get all this information to my fellow colleagues and figure out a way to prioritize what it is that we think we need to consider and what we really want and so forth.
So if I may, Madam
Yes.
Chair. So one of the things we struggle with a little bit, and I was talking with the clerk, Nete, when I walked in, and she said, well, do you have anything you want to hand out today? I said, I've got so much. I just want to see what they're interested in, and then I'll give it to you after the meeting. So we have a lot of this in a form. Again, if folks want to see it, that we can put it together and send it over, and they can go out just for reference. So glad to do that. We just kind of want to hear some feedback about what you all were interested in.
All right, we're going to try one more time. Ms. Newton?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go right ahead.
Perfect. So thank you, Mr. Jones, for outlining some of those options that we might be able to have in a P3. And I don't want to derail this meeting if this is not a good time for my question, but as you went through your list, I couldn't help but wonder, what of these things could we not do now, even in absence of a P3, whether it was, the ribbon cutting or the event or what have you, or the site selection, things that we work on, and product development. A lot of those things seem to be kind of par for the course for economic development. And as you went through your list, it wasn't until you got to the very end where I was like, well, maybe our economic development office wouldn't do it, but at the same time, as Richland County, we do variants of what seem like all those initiatives. So again, as we look at evaluating what the benefits of a P3 are, that's not to say that all of those initiatives aren't great initiatives, but I'm just unclear on which require a P3 to achieve.
Mr. Jones, you can just.
So all of council has been provided with the 2021 strategic plan that was sought and delivered. In fact, we gave it to council at the work session, and I think it was also delivered before that. But the consultants that the county employed just 2 years ago, this is what they say about why you need something beyond what's just within the county. So again, these are the county's consultants. It says that the Economic Development Office has operated within a department and it has functioned effectively as a public entity. That was the assessment made by the consulting group that the county hired. And it's done so in a highly competitive environment in South Carolina and the Southeast. This plan recommends that a new independent public-private partnership should be established to house the economic development function. It says privatization of the county's economic development. That's not just the goal. It's not privatization. The goal, and this is, I think, the critical answer to the question delivered not by me, but by a group sought out by the county. Rather, it says a new P3 will allow Richland County to fully partner with the private sector and better utilize the resources, relationships, and expertise of the business community. County leadership will have the opportunity to work with a rising class of business leaders on growth-related matters critical to the county's future.
Ms. Newton, did that help to answer your question?
It's an answer, so thanks.
Okay, did you have any follow-up before I go to the next council member?
Madam
Nope.
Chair.
Okay, Attorney Wright?
Yes, I just want to say one thing is that it goes along. I think it's a benefit that I've seen in the past, that having a private organization that kind of works alongside us helps in one, I guess, a more practical, the way I'm thinking is a more practical sense. For example, when Scout came to us and we had a strict timeline to try to get something done, luckily we had a firm that we were already using we were able to just adjust their scope to bring it in. That won't work every time. So one benefit of having a public-private partnership is that when you have situations where going through county procedures and county processes could take months, if you direct it through the private entity, they don't have those restrictions. So that's one benefit, so that when things come up that you say, hey, we need this done like yesterday, they can do it, whereas that we are required to go through certain processes. And so that's one benefit of having this public-private partnership where they're a private entity. There's certain things that they can do that we will never be able to do.
Ms. Barron, did you still have all right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of answered, well, asked my question, so I won't go down that rabbit trail again, but what I will say is that, Ray, I think some of the I'm sorry, Mr. Jones, some of the things that you present today does give us a different perspective on how to look at things. You know, I don't want you to send me a sheet of paper, but I would like to be able to really just kind of look at some of the things, as you say, the menu. And I'm more interested in the menu that you presented today. I'm sure you have lots of other options, but what you presented today appears to be more palatable than anything I've heard so far. So I'd like to have that, because I think that having that information prior to coming, we probably could have a little more, a healthier dialogue as to next steps and what we really want. But until we can, just see what it is that we can pick from, then we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. And I will say the purpose of the meeting today was really to have the open dialogue, and not providing the information ahead of time was really for Ray to be able to present it in a way and even see if that's what folks were interested in, right? Before we keep giving out paper. And so that really was okay, what do folks, what do you think? What do you feel? And so, like I said, we had our strategic planning forum in Spartanburg, and this was some of what I've heard individually from council members, that they liked a lot of the things that One Spartanburg kind of spoke to, and how we maybe needed to look at doing some of those things with RP3. And so this really was to see how do folks feel. And I think the next step can be, Mr. Jones sending information out to this committee and council members to look at those and give feedback on things you like, maybe some stuff that you're like, well, that's okay, but I don't have to have it. Or is there anything missing that you maybe want to see more of? I will say overall, I thought all of the ideas were great. I think it's a lot, right? I want to be realistic about how we approach. So I do think, being mindful of, we all know we got to kind of crawl before you run. And so I think there's some things we probably all agree on that early on are key focuses. Workforce development is definitely a huge one, I think. And the other piece, and it might have been tucked in some of the other options you gave when you talked about connections, but one of the things I want to make sure that we're utilizing our P3 is being able to connect also with communities and being able to fill those gaps with private businesses as well. So we talk about that a little bit in the child care piece or the transportation piece, but if we notice other gaps in different areas of our communities, how can we utilize those private relationships through the P3 to fill needed gaps in our community? Mr. Livingston, you recognize?
And I think when you look at this list, I think someone can quickly say to themselves, well, what else we left anybody else to do? And it's not that the P3 is going to be responsible for housing and child care and workforce development, transportation, all those kind of things. And what I see it as doing in a lot of those particular areas is just simply helping us with some resources. They're helping us, giving us some guidance, assistance, direction, things of that nature, as opposed to assuming that becomes, their responsibility. That's not the case. It's just they'll just be a wonderful resource for us on a lot of initiatives. And so when I was listening to Ms. Newton's question, I was thinking, yeah, if you look at it as if this group is going to do everything, then the question is, what else left to do? But that's not the case.
Ms. Barron?
Thank you. Just one more point, and we've had these conversations a couple of times now, and it just seems like we're not getting anywhere. And I don't. It just feels like we're not getting anywhere. Like
We are.
Okay? Well, I take your confidence in it, because I just like, what are we doing? You keep bringing more information back, but I don't hear council making saying we like this, we don't like this. But what we did say was, hey, can you give us another sheet of paper so we can read it? So help me, because I want to get to the point where we can say yay or nay about something, but I guess I don't hear the dialogue.
And so I will say, council as a whole did, we have our economic development study report that is done. It talked about a P3. Council as a whole voted on our strategic plan that includes the P3. And, several months back, Mr. Jones and his group brought out a full schedule that talked about how we would go about getting to a P3. And at that time, we did hear back from council members that said, okay, I like it, but I think we're moving too fast. Can you stop and break it down? So that's what this committee has done. We've stopped, we've broken it down. Our last meeting that the committee had, Mr. Jones brought to us a look of, let's start with the basics of, if we created a P3, how would we really look at developing the roles and responsibilities? There was a huge concern with council of losing ownership of the P3. And so the last time Mr. Jones came, there was a discussion of how do we break that down so that the county retains their ownership. And we met as a committee, we talked about what that breakdown would look like, how council would still have a certain number of seats, how we would be able to select certain people and control those seats. Then we also talked about a proposed creating of spheres and regions within the county to make sure that we had folks on the P3 board that were from all parts of the county. So that was the last decision that happened in this committee. At that point, we left and we went to our forum. During the forum, when one Spartanburg came and spoke to us, council members also really received additional information from how another P3 is set up, prior to how we heard it from others. I heard from council members that I really like how they do workforce development. I really like how they connect with the community and they have a Spark Center and how they are engaged and how they have all these programs. I heard all of that. And so Mr. Jones came back to the committee today to say, okay, now let me show you these things so we can get feedback from council members as to which items do you like. And so that is what we're doing today. Once we get that feedback, the committee will then meet again and move to the next step of the process. But we are making progress, Ms. Barron, in the committee. There's a lot of dialogue and discussion because there's a lot of pieces. And I want to make sure that all council members get their voices heard and that we're not rushing through it if people feel we need to talk about it and get it right. It is a big organization to create, and we just want to get the documents right to also allow Mr. Jones and Attorney Wright to develop the right bylaws and language. They need that feedback. So it's not as quick as maybe, 3 readings in a public hearing, but we are moving through and we are checking each part as we go through. Yes, ma'am.
And so, to that point, I agree with you there. And we are making progress, and I like the speed in which we're going. But when I hear you say, feedback, I'm thinking, are we giving feedback now? Are we giving it later? So that was to my point. And so I'm full support, and that's why I decided to come to these committee meetings, because I don't want to wait until it comes to full council for a vote for me to just, over a weekend have an opportunity to read a packet. So that's why I decided to come, so I can, work through this with the committee.
As far as feedback goes, feedback is accepted in this meeting. Feedback is accepted after we leave, and councilman's going to call me separately. Feedback will also be accepted when Ray, Mr. Jones, sends out an email. So this is not an end-all be-all. I know for some folks in the committee today, they need time to digest some of it, and we'll get the email. But our next committee meeting, we will then continue to move forward on those steps. So if you want to share all your feedback today, share it. That is great. Mr. Jones would appreciate it. But if you need time, we will send out an email and get that feedback as well to then at our next committee meeting, have that information. And I will say for all council members, we will continue to move forward discussing the P3 in the Strategic Planning Committee, as well as other issues that are on the strategic plan. And so it'll be frequent meetings where we'll continue to look at these issues. So it's not something that is getting lost or we're not moving on. The committee will continue to work through it and then be able to bring an entire document to the body once we're all on one accord. Livingston, you recognized.
Madam Chair, what I think happened when we started out, and the reason why I'm glad we I think, I almost see where we are now as kind of a restart. I think we started out, in my opinion, with too much emphasis on structure and the makeup of the group and that kind of thing. I think.
You remember why we started out that way,
Yeah,
right?
huh?
You remember why we started out that way?
I don't know why we started that way, but I probably had a part of it too. I don't know.
Okay. Council was very concerned about control, and so that's why we started out with the structure piece versus the other pieces.
So we started out with the structure. But I think it's hard to get there without dealing with the function and the purpose and so forth. And these things allow us to decide on, what we want to do first, and then it becomes easier for us to make sense out of figuring out how to need the structure, who need to be there. So yeah, I agree with you. It's taking a little time because we kind of, in my opinion, we kind of want to restart, in terms of how we're doing it.
I do want to say, if at any time, I'll be happy to have these meetings more frequently, and we can speed this up. If y'all think we could get here and get this done by June. Mr. Livingston?
I mean, I think we can.
Great. Ms. Newton, did you have a question?
I'll ask my question later. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. English, you're recognized.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all. Appreciate you being here, Mr. Jones. And to the council and to Mr. Jones, you guys know I love you. But I'm going to need y'all to stop using Just Scout and use Server Solutions as well, because that's my baby, okay? And they're doing all of those things that we're talking about: community involvement, workforce development. They're building their flagship here, and I'm proud of that, but I never hear them. I always hear Scout. So y'all add Server Solutions to that list. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. English. That you are right. That is a key part, especially in the P3 when we talk about marketing. We'll make sure we have folks that are looking at all of our businesses in our community and not forgetting any of them, because they are all very important. And I do want to take a minute to recognize our Vice Chair, County Council, for attending the meeting today. Councilman Pugh, thank you for joining us. Any other thoughts or comments? I will say I'm appreciative that so many council members did show up today, because it does help Ms. Barron, you're right. When you are here, the committee meetings and a part of the conversation. So I do appreciate y'all attending today. And I have heard the feedback that we definitely need to move this process along a little faster than what I'm doing. And so I will make sure that we work to do that to get this done by June. Any other thoughts or next steps? I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jones. Any next steps, wrap up you want to provide?
Maybe just want to make sure tell you what we've heard. And so I think what we've heard is we need to distill some of the menu options and get them into a format that folks can take a look at, which we'll do, and work with Attorney Wright and make sure that gets out. We'll think about an accelerated timeline and what that might look like, and make sure that we're in lockstep with this committee and council in terms of delivering what it needs to consider on a more accelerated timeline. So we heard those two things loud and clear.
Thank you. All right, we are at item number 5, adjournment.
So move, Madam Chair.
Second. Madam Clerk?
Livingston,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.